I'm not allowed to swear. Tough. Hi, I'm Abigail, the SENsible SENCO from SENDCO Solutions, and welcome to the first video in a Q&A around the SENCO role. Don't forget to click the like, to subscribe, and to leave a comment in the comment section below. I'm joined today by Gavin, who is going to ask me the question.
So today's question, Abigail, comes from Katherine, who says, I only have 5% of my school on the SEN register. Should I have more?
Okay, that's a really great question, and it depends on the length of a piece of string. So 5% might actually be right for her school. It might actually be too high, or it could be too low. We don't know. There's lots of pieces of information that feed into this. What we have to think about is, what is she comparing herself to? And the answer is she's probably comparing herself to the national statistic, and the national statistic is 14.6% SEN. What we have to remember is that figure includes every child who is classed as an SEN pupil. So that includes 100% of pupils who are attending a special needs school, because every child there is special needs. Whereas across the rest of the country we've got different percentages. So somebody is always going to be higher than that 14.6%, and somebody is always going to be much lower than that 14.6%. To get the answer to her question, what we really need to do is look at a few pieces of information. And the first one of those is to have a look at the SEN Code of Practice. And if you don't have a copy, you can get a printed version. Oh, there you go, it's that way around. You can get a printed version of it from Amazon. If you look my name up, A. Hawkins, and SEND Code of Practice, you'll find one on there. I do charge for it, I'm sorry. But it's much more handy than having a printed out version that you lose all of the time. You've seen my folders when they fall to pieces.
Yeah. Messy.
Very messy.
Very messy.
Okay? This one I can stick post-it notes in. Anyway, so she could go to the SEN Code of Practice and she could look at Chapter 6. And Chapter 6, paragraph 6.14, 6.15 talk about identifying SEN in schools. So 6.14 is about having a clear approach to doing that. And 6.15 has that wonderful phrase in there that we keep referring to in SEN, that they should be receiving something additional to and different from the majority of other pupils of the same age in their school, or what is normally available to pupils in their school. So that's one place you could look. And it isn't just those two paragraphs, it actually goes through to paragraph 6.27 in terms of identifying SEN in schools. So there's quite a few paragraphs there to go and read and find out about. The second place you could go and look is at her own graduated approach. So every school has to have a SEN policy or document, or SEN review that talks about how they identify SEN in their school. And she could be looking at that and going, okay, well, you know, we're a nice leafy suburb, we don't have very many pupils on the Pupil Premium, we don't have many students with a need, we're a grammar school, and you might find that actually 5% is probably the right number for her school. On the other hand, she might be an inner city school with high levels of deprivation and lots of other factors coming into it that might bump up the SEN figure, and maybe she's under-identifying those students that need to be on there because she's providing so much for everybody that it's become part of normal practice. What she can also do is look at schools in her local area. So if she is the poor neighbour to the local grammar school, then maybe her SEN figure should be much higher than theirs is. Or if she is the grammar school, her figure might be lower. And that's just, you know, one of those things you kind of have to look at. Just because I classify a child as SEN in my school doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be SEN in another school. And a great example of this would be our own son. So Xavier is 10, he's in year 5, and he has a visual impairment. So he has a cataract. He was born with that cataract on his eye. However, it doesn't affect him in any way whatsoever within school, apart from the fact he needs to wear sunglasses if it's bright sunshine outside, and if he's reading he needs to make sure he's got plenty of light on the page. Who doesn't? So he's not classified as being a special educational needs student because the school is not having to make any adjustments or changes to their curriculum for him.
So because the school isn't having to make any extra reasonable adjustments from what the child already has or is supplied with basically from the parent,
Yep.
then there's no need to put them on the SEN register.
Pretty much, because the school isn't doing anything beyond what that child is capable of doing for themselves. So the same might apply to students who have visual stress. So I suffer from visual stress, and I very often use a purple overlay to reduce the... I kind of see images on the page. I get duplicate images when I'm trying to read things. It doesn't make me special needs, though. There are other things that make me special needs, but it's not that one. Thanks. Okay, but that isn't something, and just putting an overlay on a piece of paper, can I cope without it? Yes, I can. Is it better if I have it? Yes, it is. Do people need to be aware of it? Maybe. If I was a child in a school, I might need my teacher to be aware. I might want to get my overlay out. But it's not really a special educational need just to need a piece of plastic to put over my page. If I needed additional things, say for example I needed my purple overlay and I needed everything printing in size 16 font and everything on the computer screen needed to be in red ink or something, then maybe that does make me a little bit more special or a little bit more different, and they are providing something additional and different from what they're providing to everybody else in the school.
So, do exam concessions, let me get that right,
Yeah.
count as extra special educational needs for putting them on the SEN register?
That really, again, depends on the school. So, typically speaking, no. Okay, so just because I need a separate room because I get a bit nervous when I do an exam doesn't necessarily mean I have a special educational need. It's not something I need on an ongoing basis. It's something I need for a special circumstance. If I'm needing a reader and a scribe, that might make me SEN, because actually one of the criteria for your exam concessions is that should be part of normal working practice. And if I've got to have a reader and a scribe in an exam, that means I must be having one in my lessons, and that isn't normal. That isn't something that's going on for everybody in the school, or even the vast majority in the school. Therefore, they probably are on your SEN register.
Okay,
That-
that makes sense.
That makes
sense to me.
And you're not educational, are you?
No, I'm not educational.
You are educated, but not educational.
I am educated, but not educational.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've had a look at the SEN Code of Practice. She could also go and look at that graduated approach. She could look at her local authority's local offer. So what is the local authority saying they are going to offer students with particular needs, and what are they expecting schools to offer as part of their core package, and then what is that school able to offer on top of that core package as well. So they're all things that she could be looking at to decide, does this child really belong on my SEN register? The other place you can go and look is the National Baseline Statistics. So the government come out with a document around about July every year. It's July the 4th, 2019, the most recent document. And in that document, it talks about the most recent SEN statistics. And they're taken from the census, and the results of census are released in the January. So it's October census, release the results in January, and that's then generated into a report in June, around about June time. Okay, so our most recent one, like I say, is July 2019, and we have got an upward trend at the moment. So we went up by about 0.4% to 14.6% of pupils who are now identified as having an SEN need of some description. And one of the nice things about going and actually looking at that report rather than just looking at the number is that it talks about the different categories of schools. So you could look at the whole figure, or you could look at primary schools and secondary schools, and what you discover is that those numbers are very slightly different between those two types of schools. You can look at academies and maintained schools, and you'll see again there's a slight difference between the two. And of course there's going to be special schools in there, which is where that 100% figure comes from. which really boosts up what is actually going on in mainstream schools. So mainstream schools is probably around about 12%, if we're absolutely honest, once we've taken out special schools. And that's one of the things I noticed something on Facebook the other week where somebody said the percentage has gone up by about 2%, and when you look at it, yeah, it looks like it has, but actually it hasn't. It's just that they've looked at two different pieces of data. So they looked at it excluding special schools and then including special schools. So we have to be very careful when we're looking at information, especially that the DFE produces for us. Those tables also break it down by SEN need. So in Nottingham, we have an ASD specialist based at the QMC, the Queen's Medical Centre, and we find we have quite a lot of students who end up with an ASD diagnosis. So our percentage of ASD is quite high. And Staffordshire have the Keele University base, so I'm expecting that one to go up as well. And Leeds have speech and language. They have a screening programme for their reception in year 1 that every child in Leeds has to undertake. That's my understanding anyway. And that means their percentage of SLCN is really, really high. So I spoke to a school earlier this week, a primary school, and they have 46% of their SEN pupils, so however many they've got, are on the SEN register for speech, language and communication needs. And that's a really, really high figure. And if I was to look at that, I would probably look at it and go, oh my goodness, I must be doing it wrong. But actually, when I take it into the context of that local authority, it actually probably makes sense. It might even be lower than that local authority is actually truly identifying. And of course, it balances itself out over time. So if you did a comparison of speech, language, and communication needs between a primary school and a secondary school in Leeds, you would probably find the secondary school is around about 4% perhaps, or whatever. So it's a massive, massive difference.
So are you saying then that Katherine, in this case here, should look at her local authority and compare herself to that with the other schools around that local authority?
Yeah, absolutely. So she should be looking at her SEN code of practice to make sure she is identifying those students who are receiving something additional to and different from. They are her SEN cohort. She needs to look at her own graduated approach and that local offer from the local authority and what they are saying is going on, and comparing herself a little bit there. But she also needs to be looking at that national figure and those baseline statistics along with where she is, her little pocket. She might be in this wonderful little leafy suburb with only 12 children in the school and 5% of them are SEN. That may be absolutely correct for her school. It is not possible to say, no, you need to identify another 30 kids or whatever it is. And what people seem to think is, oh, if I put more on the SEN register, I get more funding. They don't.
That's what I was just about to ask you.
Go on, what would you...
So you've just said that there, and I know for a case that there are schools out there that do just bung everybody onto the SEN register and then expect some miracle to happen with their funding, which doesn't happen because of the way the funding is actually worked out. And I know you've done a video before on how funding is done with element 1, element 2 and the element 3 as well.
That's right. So a lot of SENCOs and a lot of head teachers as well are under this misconception that if I put a child on the SEN register, I'm going to get some extra money. And that isn't necessarily true. The actual formula for calculating your element 2 budget, your notional budget or your nominal budget, whatever you want to call it, has nothing whatsoever to do with SEN. So they don't need to be on your SEN register for that money to come in. One of the reasons you find secondary schools put children on the SEN register is that it can work in their favour when they're looking at GCSE results and Progress 8. However, there's always a flip side to that as well, because if those pupils then don't make the progress, it looks like their SEN cohort isn't making progress. And it can trigger an SEN review, an Ofsted review, especially if they suddenly bung a load of year 11s on at the last minute with, oh, they're going to be SEN, because they think it's going to boost their figure, and of course it doesn't.
Right. So so having too many people on your SEN register, what's the catch on that then?
So None, apart from the fact that if you've got too many students on your SEN register, you are having to provide something additional to and different for every single one of them, and you're going to have to do your 3 reviews a year and evidence all of that. So you're actually making more work for yourself by identifying more pupils to put on there.
So putting more stuff on there just gives more workload to that poor SENCO.
And everybody who's teaching them, of course, if you've persuaded your teachers to actually do something. But yes, you're adding work to it. If you are genuinely 5%, that is what you are. Can I come and work at your school?
So, if a child moves from one school where all their needs are catered for on a basis of that school does that anyway, because most of those children do that, to a different school where those needs won't be catered for in such a round kind of normalised way, how does that child then get that SEN label, as it is, for the new school?
That's an interesting question. So what you're effectively saying is we've got one child in one school where normal practice provides lots and lots of additional support for them, and they move to another school, and of course in this first school they haven't been identified as SEN because that wonderful package that's available, but they move to school number 2 where those things are perhaps not available. So one place that school is going to get information from is from the parents when they apply for a place at that school. We usually have a parent meeting, and that might not be with the SENCO. It very often isn't with the SENCO. It might be with the head of year or something. So they're going to have that. The parents might say, "Oh, we had extra literacy every morning for 35 minutes or something." That would probably start to trigger a couple of alarm bells that say, "Oh, okay."
Well, you'd hope so anyway.
You'd hope so. It doesn't always happen, but and we know parents are not always forthcoming with information. The other place that school will perhaps find information is in the child's file. So although they're not SEN, the chances are they might still have a provision map that's been made for them that tracks information, or maybe you'll see something in there that says that they were part of a Ruth Miskin group and they're in year 4 or something, and you might go, that's a bit odd, and you might pick it up from there. You might also pick it up from, I don't know, maybe I'm just a very thorough teacher, but I would be looking at the website of the previous school that child came from, and especially if they're in my local area and I know what their package is, I'm probably going to be aware anyway. But if they've come from out of area, I might go and look on the website of that school and see, oh my goodness, they do thousands of things. Wow, can I have their staffing? But actually realise that holistic package around the child. However, let's be honest, what will normally happen is that child will come into your school, you'll put them in as normal, and by the end of week 1 you'll see that they're struggling, they're not coping, maybe behaviours will start to come out of it, and sometimes we put it down to settling, and maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should be looking at actually what was their previous experience, and is that actually affecting what's going on now.
Okay. On the back end of that, I've got another question, and it's to do with costing. So, they've come from the school, you've taken them on, and then suddenly you realise that their needs are far higher than you'd expected. How do you cope with the extra cost to meet those needs?
I'm not allowed to swear. Tough.
No.
Basically, you've taken that child on roll just because they're going to cost you additional money. Tough. You have options available to you. First one is to meet their needs from your notional budget. That's what you'll be expected to do. The second one is if their needs really are that extreme compared to your normal cohort, then you're going to have to go through the EHC process. So you're going to have to apply for an education healthcare needs plan, and your money that comes alongside that. I know some local authorities still have high needs funding, so they don't need an EHC to access that funding. But basically, if you've taken that child on roll, however false you feel that is, you've already offered them a place, they're already at your school, you are now stuck with them, is the polite way of putting it. You are going to have to meet their needs.
So do your homework.
Yeah. However, you cannot reject a child because they have special educational needs anyway. So if somebody applies to your school and you have space in your school, you have to take that child.
So if they've got special educational needs and they are labelled as such. But going back to the original thing where that school didn't label them, and then you found that that child had larger needs, but he didn't have the label at the time and wasn't given the label when he came across, would you still have to accept that child then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the admissions process is quite complicated in UK schools, but every school has an admissions policy, and although parents are supposed to declare things like yes they're on the SEN register, or yes they've got an ASD diagnosis, or whatever it is, even if they don't, there isn't actually anything done against parents. The only place where it comes into play is when that school is over capacity. And you've got your criteria that come into play for which child gets priority over others. But let's face it, most children transferring mid-year to a school, once they've applied to you, there are very, very, very few criteria you can use to turn around and go, no, we're not having that child. The exception will be if that child applies to you within the HCP, and you can evidence that taking that child in will be detrimental to meeting the needs of the other children you currently have in the school.
That's what I was going to ask next. If the cost base became that big for that child there, and it did have the impact on the other children, surely the other children would take precedent over that one child in the school.
Not so much take precedent, but you have the opportunity to write a report back to your local authority saying that no, this is not an appropriate placement, we're not able to meet the needs, these are the reasons why we cannot meet the needs, and financially you can use a financial argument, but very often what you'll find is the local authority will come back and say, well, we'll give you X amount of money for it. It is very, very difficult to reject a child who wants to come to your school, and we have to remember parents have rights. And if a parent, especially a parent of a child within the HCP, and we have kind of gone off topic a little bit, but this is your highest level of SEN need, but if a child has an EHCP, that parent has the right to choose what type of school they want them to go to, and they may not want a special school, they may want your school.
Okay, well, I think that covers all the rest of it.
Thank you.